So today I am interviewing a friend of mine named Tony. Great guy. Known him for a couple of years. He's gone through some very interesting things in his life, including an awakening, and actually an awakening at a young age, which is, something that's reasonably uncommon, but it's not unheard of. And I do get this question quite a bit. And he's really the first person I've interviewed, I think, that has had a significant shift at such a young age. So, we're going to talk about all kinds of interesting things. And I just want to introduce Tony. Hey, Tony.
Hello.
Thanks for coming.
Oh yeah, thanks for having me.
All right. So let's just start wherever it feels relevant to you to begin about sort of your story with this whole awakening thing, and maybe kind of a little bit what childhood was like, to the degree you think it's relevant, or whatever you think is relevant to talk about.
Okay, I'll just tell like a little quick version up to the first awakening, and you can just ask me whatever questions you want about it. So the first 10 years of my life were pretty destabilizing and violence. My father was alcoholic, and he was violent to both of me and my mother and me. And we moved also in those first 10 years, probably about 13 times. So I had to start over a whole lot every year and a half, and make new friends and do all that. So it was pretty crazy time. And then like a weird thing happened when I was 6 years old. I found a dead body. I know that's pretty wild, but yeah, I found a dead body. And so that's just like one thing. A lot of weird stuff like that happened. So when I got to be about 10 years old, good.
I was going to ask you, with the finding the dead body, can you give us just a little bit about that? Like maybe how it happened, because it's obviously an interesting story, but more like, how did it impact you? What was your emotional response to it, or was there one?
Well, there had been already a lot of violence in my family ahead of time, and I'd kind of become used to that. Not used to it, but it happened a lot, and so I just kind of got used to it. But this was like totally different. I was playing in my grandparents' front yard, and there was a car parked in the front yard in between their house and another house at the road. And it stayed there for like a week. And it was like, I think if I remember right, it was like an old Chevette. This was like in the 80s. And I was just playing out in the front yard, and I wandered over to the car, and I looked in it, and there was a dead woman in the back seat in the floorboard. And she had been dead for like a couple days. So she was blue and purple looking, and she had been, it turned out she had been raped and strangled and left in the car. And then the guy had parked the car in between two houses, to kind of not be seen. I have no idea if he ever got caught or anything like that. So of course I ran in the house and told my grandparents, and, called the police, and it was a whole thing. And then my grandfather had to go down to the station and ask, talk a bunch of questions and all that kind of stuff. I don't remember. I remember still the image in my head. Like, I still remember the first image and seeing it. And I was just looked at it, and, it took me back, but I didn't, as far as I remember, I didn't have a major emotional reaction. I just it was like, whoa. And then I just looked for like a couple seconds to make sure. I guess I was only 6. So I just kind of looked and was like, and then I ran into the house and told them. And of course, I don't think they believed me at first. They were like, "Oh, come on!" And I was like, "Come on!" And then they did. And then I was like, "Whoa!" And then, yep, it was real.
Wow. That's wild, man. Well, thanks for
Yeah,
sharing. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. But I don't remember it affecting me too much in any kind of way. But
I think it's a lot
uh,
like that for kids a lot, where it's like, especially when you're really young, it's just what's happening. You just see it, and sometimes we
yeah, I'm
don't
like,
really develop reactions until we see others develop those types of reactions. And then we kind of learn from it almost. But I know what you mean. Yeah.
yeah. Um, so about 10 years old, when I was about 10 years old, my mom remarried, and we moved to the town I live in now, but I've lived different places before and then come back here. But after all that, it was a lot of suffering, a lot of destabilization. So I started to ask, I was just be like, well, what is going on here? I was like 10. I'm like, is this what it is? Is this how reality is or life is? And so I did inquiry, but I didn't know I was doing it. And I just started to ask, like, what is going on here? Like, what are we doing here? And then I remember a very specific question I would ask is I would go, why are people here? So what is this place and why are people here? That's my 10 or 11-year-old brain would ask. So I remember I would lay in my bed at night, and before I would go to sleep, I would just look up to the ceiling, and I wouldn't think about it logically because I think I was too young to really get into it. So it was just kind of like a wondering. I was just wondering, like, why are people here? And I remember having like this thing where my mind would get to the edge of where it could go, basically. And it would feel like I was kind of pushing on a balloon, is what it kind of felt like mentally pushing on a balloon and stretching my mind. And then it's like I felt something, but I couldn't go there. It was like a stretching. This is kind of how I remember it. And so I did that for like a long time, I think. And then when I was 13, I was at the shopping mall with my mom, one of those mega malls they had in the 80s. And there was two escalators, and they were both right beside each other. And then one was going up and one was going down. And my mom wanted to go up. So I was walking in front of her, and I went to the escalator that was going up, that was coming down, but I thought it was going up. So I went to step on it, just not thinking, teenager. And I went to step on it, and I had a moment where I realized, oh, I took like 2 or 3 steps, and I was like, oh, I'm on the wrong escalator. On the wrong thing. And when I did that, everything got really wavy. At first, everything got really wavy and like hazy, and I was like, I've come to think of it almost like a koan, but physical, because it's like my mind, for some reason, couldn't handle that I was getting on the wrong escalator, and it just stopped, and I froze. And then when that happened, reality shattered right in front of me like a mirror, and it just blew into it felt like billions of pieces. And when it happened, I was like this, which I feel like maybe was the fear barrier, but it was so fast. It's like I didn't even have time to think about it. It was almost like I was waving as I went by, like, hello, fear barrier. So when it happened, it just blew apart, and it was like all black. Everything was black. And then it felt like a computer that reboots. It felt like it shut down and started again. And then everything turned like bright white, and there was nothing but white. And then all of a sudden, the mirrors came backwards, and in reality went through and pieced itself right back together. And it felt out of time, space, just like I didn't know what was going on. And my mom grabbed me, and she was like, "What are you doing?" It was like falling down. And then after that, it just I was just blown away, but I didn't tell her about it. And we kept, walking around, and I was just like, didn't know what was going on.
Yeah, it brought to mind a couple of things. One is when you say the mind just froze because of walking up the escalator, like it just went on tilt or whatever. And that reminds me so much of that scene in Revolver where he gets handed the card, and right as he reads the card on the top of the stairs, he freezes. And it says something like the mind saw a problem it couldn't solve. And his whole body froze, and he just falls down the entire flight of stairs, like completely.
Right. Yeah.
That's exactly
it is like that. Yeah,
it's
it is
exactly
like that.
what that's like. Yeah.
That is like that.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it felt like. It was just like stopped.
Yeah. And I also wanted to say, like, what a I mean, just saying that, it's very obvious that you went completely, not you, but the identity structure completely stopped. And that has such a profound effect. Of course, you can't know that then. You can't even know what happened. And what the mind makes of that is, who knows? It can make little of it or a lot of it, but it doesn't even matter, because that's such a profound and actually very young, place to find yourself going beyond identity. I'm curious, like, how did that affect you? If you remember, it's been a long time, obviously. How did that affect you over the next weeks to months? Did you reflect on it, or did you notice other things changing, or did you just kind of move on and Did you notice something fundamentally changing, had changed over time that kind of didn't change back, or how did that affect you, like in the, say, short term?
The short term, yeah, a lot of things. Not a whole lot changed in the short term. I was trying to remember this. I was trying to remember if I had a honeymoon period or not, because people talk about that. And what I can remember is that the seventh and eighth grade, middle school years, were some of my favorite years of my life. Those 2 years, and that was in that time period. And that's only the thing I can only connect. I'm not sure. And then a lot of stuff kind of went haywire after that when I got into high school. So that tracks as far as being a honeymoon period, but I was just too young, and I don't remember. It was just it was the most stable I had been in my whole life. I didn't move, and I was there. I had same friends, and made like 5 friends, and then those are the same friends. I still have the same 5 friends that I had that I met then now. Like I still talk to them and hang out with them sometimes and stuff like that. So that's pretty cool. But
do you remember talking to anyone about, just out of curiosity, did you bring it up to anyone at all, or probably did had no way of talking, but yeah.
My family was not, I was raised in, like, I live in North Carolina, so I was raised in the Bible Belt, Southern Baptist church type, where everybody, acts, a lot of them act religious, but they don't act religious behind the scenes. They just, that's kind of a Southern Baptist thing there. But no, I didn't have anybody to talk about that at all. I just kept to and I didn't really even know what it was. And, but it changed, as I was going into high school. It really, I've heard Adyashanti say something about it can take away the personal will. And that's what it kind of felt like with me. I wasn't interested in normal things. I didn't care about a career per se. I just wanted to get back to that, or I wanted to know what that was. Because it was like a major relief, but it was also like just an expansion. And like, I knew that this place wasn't what it was, but I didn't know what it was, like I didn't know, but I knew it was. So of course, like I was still interested in things that a high school boy, like I was interested in girls and, into doing stuff and hanging out. I didn't lose interest that way, but I lost interest in like maybe ambitions. I didn't have big ambitions, or I didn't really care about anything like that. So like, they start talking to you about going to college and doing all this stuff. And it just felt very unimportant to me. So that caused a lot of problems for me in a way too.
Yeah. It's interesting. I can relate to that a lot. And I think people who are very prone to waking up, or some people who are just kind of naturally present and clear at those ages, find that it's like, what strikes me as you describe it is like, yeah, you have the normal drives of a person that age, and you're kind of developing, all those things are happening, but to like think in a really abstract way about the future based on other people's idea of success, and you're looking at those other people going, yeah, but you're suffering too. Like, it's just so inauthentic in a way. And I felt exactly like that going through high school. I was like, I don't care. Like, I'd rather feel good right now and party, and like anything to just feel a little bit less suffering. But it's so hard to put together an idea of the future or even know why I cared about that.
Yeah. I had like a personal integrity where I wanted to make good grades for myself, but I also kind of didn't want to go too far. So I was like a ABC student, like some things I did good in, but I didn't care about those kind of things. So it was like good and bad effects from that, because in a one way, what I started to notice was sort of like this background level of awareness of watching things and people. And I didn't get caught up as a teenager and going in my 20s in a lot of the dramas that a lot of people would. Like, it just wasn't there. Like, I didn't want to do it. I didn't feel the need to. And I used to think, when I started this spiritual type stuff, I used to think, oh wow, because I heard Adyashanti mention one time too, like he had a strong level of awareness from a child and all this stuff. So then I used to, the mind to grab onto that and go, oh, that's me too, But then later, when doing shadow work, I figured out No, I just had a lot of awareness because a lot of crazy shit was happening around me all the time. And it was like a defense mechanism to be like hyper aware of your surroundings and what was going on. So that was part of my shadow work too, that I figured that out at some point in time.
Yeah, you mentioned being a bit preoccupied with like what is that? What's going on? How do I kind of get back to that? Did
Yeah.
I guess in high school or maybe just after high school, did you have a orientation at that point to some kind of spirituality or any kind of spirituality? Did you have a sense that what had happened was what people, at least some people in spiritual circles, are talking about? Or did you put those together in that way?
Well, when I got in my 20s, I still went to church and throughout high school because my parents made me. I had friends there and stuff, but I couldn't get into like the rules and the reg. It never made a whole lot of sense to me in the first place. But after that, it definitely didn't make any sense. But here
Mm,
I have my parents and other people around me saying all this stuff, and I obviously know that it's doesn't feel right.
hmm
And my stepfather was actually a Methodist preacher and a youth minister. He was a youth minister at the time, but he became a Methodist preacher later. So that was that was interesting. And he also happened to be a narcissist too. So that's on top of that. But so there was just a whole lot of feeling very alien and just kind of backing out of participation.
mm.
A lot of observing. I felt like I've talked to you about this, that I think I discovered it on one of your early online retreats, is that it felt like I was shoved into a witness state or observer state. So then identification was not totally broken because it felt like obviously that's a time when identification is really building. So it kind of felt like the thoughts didn't feel like me, but they felt almost like a possession. And I don't mean that like literally, like I felt like I was possessed by a demon, but it felt like just a possession. Like it felt like something. It's like you could very see. It's like I could see my conditioning clearly without knowing that it was conditioning. Yeah,
Mm.
I guess is the good way to say it.
I remember
So that,
clearly the first time we talked about that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It was on a retreat. It was a question and answer session.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I
we talked
remember.
about it before that privately too, though. Yeah.
Yeah, I've talked. I remember. Yeah, I remember a couple times talking to you early on. It was a few years back. I remember so
Yeah.
distinctly because you felt very clear to me. Like like awareness wise, there was clarity, but I could also feel your frustration, and you were, verbalizing your frustration, as the more we talked, the more
Yeah.
it felt like a friction inside. Like there was, and it kind of all came back to that thing that happened when we were 13. There was part of you that almost wanted to section it off and push it away. There was a part of you that knew darn well like that was opening to something beyond you, and there was like the ambivalence of like wanting to orient to it at the same time. It kind of did make you feel more alienated, or seemed to at least bring that up, and it was just like a friction point. So you felt kind of, I don't know, a little frozen in the emotion space or something, and yet your clarity was obvious. Also, I wanted to reflect that I think that's exactly what happens to most, if not all, people when this starts happening young, is they find a the disassociating to some degree or in various situations is like kind of escape, and it can create this sort of watcher state. I'll even say I think everyone's disassociated when there's mind identification going on. It's a sort of disassociated, socially agreed upon state of experience that we're always like subliminally communicating with one another to reinforce and stabilize. But once you start to break the identity spell, then you still have the ability actually to disassociate even more, maybe, perhaps, just kind of go into like but it becomes skewed in a way, right? It becomes, well, disassociated from the crux of what's causing us to suffer, which is the pain body or the emotion body, or as you mentioned, shadow work. And yeah, I mean, clearly that's where you went right after we started talking, is like deeper into shadow material and so forth.
Yeah. Well, as a good way to summary, I spent my 20s and about half my 30s in a very depressed, angry, frustrated, stuck, lost feeling state. That's kind of the stuck was like the main word. Stuck and frustrated. Because it was like if I was to describe it, it was like I had this, because of that experience, and I had this real need to be close to God, but I didn't feel religious, and even I didn't really feel spiritual, but it felt like that was the direction I had to go to figure it out. And it felt like, it kind of felt like this was shown to me that I didn't know about non-duality then. I've done martial arts since I was 7, so I knew about Zen because I watched, Kung Fu theater when I was a kid, and there's like these masters that knew all these things. You hear all these pearls of wisdom, and you go, "Oh man, that's awesome!" So that was super cool. So I did know about Zen, but I didn't know about Zen, like good Zen. It was like generic commercialized Zen that you just hear about. So until I started delving deeper, and then I didn't know. But so I spent that time period. I didn't have any pointers basically, and I read a bunch of books and read things like I was exploring, and I remember one of the first things I had picked up was Conversations with God, and that helped me see things in a new way that I hadn't seen before. And then I read some of the Seth books, which was like channeled stuff, and I didn't necessarily believe it, but it opened my mind up to new things that I'd never thought of before, and so that was cool enough for me, So I wanted to read it. And then, eventually I started getting closer. I found about Jed McKenna, and I liked a whole lot of what he said, cut through a lot of good stuff, a lot of that really helped cut through some of the spiritual stuff. And I was a super rebellious dude, so I was never going to like go to India or be with a guru or any of that. I just had a very loner logic reason. I'm going to wrestle this to the ground and figure it out, and I couldn't figure out why God kind of deserted me. It's kind of what it felt like. It's like, here's a little something, but that's it. So that's what it felt like through my 20s and 30s. And I tried to do some psychedelics in my 20s I remember I had an LSD experience one time that was a little similar to my first awakening, but it felt like almost like cosplay, trying to imitate awakening. The awakening itself felt much more like, when I had the awakening, I felt like I was that. When I had the LSD, it felt like a self still experiencing something. So there was like kind of a fear there. There was no fear in the first awakening. Once I got past that initial, like, it didn't feel like that at all.
Mm-hmm.
And then I found my first mentor, and then, who I'm talking about, but he helped me see through a lot of, concepts I had wrong, ways I was looking about it, ideas. And then I worked with him for about 2.5 years, and he helped me out a whole lot with that kind of stuff. And I started really digging into like emotion work and my mental processes, and, dug myself kind of out of depression a whole lot. Not all the way, but a whole lot. I would say the depression did, but that frustration and stuff, and there was a little bit of anger there, it didn't. And then somehow I got in contact with you. I don't know how. I got lucky because it was like right at the time you just released your book, and then so I got to talk to you privately, a lot. And so from then on, with really great pointings. Like if I had your book when I was like 18 or 20, man, it would have been way, way better that way.
I kind of, I wrote it from really, I don't know where I wrote it from. It came in different ways, but if I felt like, how do I orient the language in this section or chapter? I would kind of orient it to what would I have wanted to read at 19? Like I was literally talking to myself at 19 of this suffering guy who knew there was something beyond this, and just noticed how much suffering there was here and in pretty much everyone in some way or another. What would I have wanted to know if I was sat down and talked directly to myself? That's really what I did,
Yeah. That's true. It was a lot of it. When I read your book, a lot of it I knew already, and I, working with the other guy and all this stuff. But some of your chapters, like paradox and thoughts, and some of the emotion stuff was really like detailed and like really good. And really helpful for this last half of what's been happening.
Yeah, I'm really curious to ask you. I mean, not have to talk about very specific personal things, but I'm really curious to ask you this because I know this is an area people ask about a lot. It comes up all the time. It's the most overlooked area in spirituality. Well, in broad spirituality, there's a lot of stuff that gets overlooked, but I mean, in true awakening, awareness, direct path type stuff, this is the area that, in my opinion, that just gets overlooked so much and misunderstood. It's shadow work, emotion work. And you're a masculine guy. You grew up, you kind of have that warrior spirit we've talked about, which is great. But also, you came from a lot of trauma, including physical trauma. So many people ask about
Right.
this, and it's very difficult. Of course, in some way, it prompts you to wake up. It almost makes certain parts of it easier, but it makes other parts of it maybe potentially more challenging or more drawn out. I guess a couple questions. What worked for you? What changed for you that kind of gave you access to emotion or the shadow? Like, is it something about the way you understood it, the way you worked with it physically? Was there modalities that helped? Number one. And then number two, like, would you tell somebody who's gone through this kind of stuff? Because they're everywhere. People who are so traumatized and yet they just know there's something beyond. They can feel there's something more real here. They want to address it, but the trauma can be has such gravity to it to pull you into either disorientation or disassociation or bypassing, maybe things like that. What would you say to that?
I've got yeah, a few good things. One is I did the derealization thing, and to me it felt like, and now after the last retreat, knowing the difference, like what the difference is, the derealization before was me. It felt like creating kind of a pocket consciousness to observe the world, to repress the emotions. Um, so don't do that. Don't do that. I've
Yeah,
heard you
that's
say.
like,
I've heard you say a couple times when you said something like, um, "When if you start to fight reality, it's going to get ugly," and that's what my 20s were. It was
yeah,
like just wrestling with God, and then like he kicked my ass. It was like I was trying to logically wrestle this thing to the ground, and it was like, nope, not going to do that. And what I discovered was like one 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 summarizing point I could discover that I've discovered in that time period was the narrative that you think you are can never ever victimize itself enough for what you really are to give a shit. It's not going to it's not I didn't have a victim mentality. I mean, I went to work, and I didn't have any kind of, I was on my own since I was 18. uh and I didn't have that, but I had the victim mentality in the, why is the world against me, why is the universe against me? And I was trying to figure it out, and I would get angry with God, and I would be like, I want to be close to you. Why are you doing this to me? Why did you show me this and then do, and why can't I find my way in the world? Like, what is going on here? And as you know, that's a thought. But to me at the time, the universe showing me these things, or what I felt was against me, was my own narrative circling around and coming back.
yeah.
And I blame that on the universe or God, life, stuff like that. So my victimization was an internal one all the time, not
Dude, this
external.
this is so important. One of the most challenging groups of people I've worked with, and I've worked with a lot of them, are people who disassociate as their primary mm, stress response, maybe, but they're doing it
Yeah.
internally. And it's exactly what you said. It's like it can be so hard to even explain like what I mean by integrating, what I mean by feeling, just going to the physical sensations, and what
Yeah.
I mean by don't push thoughts away. Don't push, you can set up a thought that says I'm angry at God or life, and then even push that away, right? Like not realizing you're building a dualistic identity with the way you're interacting with your own thoughts. And although there at first there's a sort of instant gratification component, like you are kind of avoiding in a way, you're pushing back into this pocket of consciousness, the long-term consequences of that, like
Yeah.
it's like a credit card with like 75% interest. Like you don't want to
It
do
just
that.
wears you out.
It wears
It's
you. It's
like you have
exactly what
the
it does.
identity of battling, of being the battler, or being especially men, we have like we got to figure it out. We got to handle it. We can't complain. We can't talk about our feelings. We just got to do it.
Mm.
And that's kind of how I was. I had a sensitive side too. Like I had like there was a, what you might call a heart based, it was never like real heart based, but there was a sensitive side there too that would come out. And, but there was a whole lot of, like you said, warrior mentality about it. And you just got to figure it out logically, even when I got older and I was, my dad, my first dad, biological father, had contacted my mom and wanted to talk to me. I had done this, what I would call the logical side of emotion work, where I wrote out pages and pages of like, his dad was bad to him, so he did this, and logic, X versus X and Y equals this. And it was like, so I should forgive him because he had no choice, and that's help. It did help. It's helpful to see things from another perspective and abstractly look at situations to, see another side of it. But I wasn't feeling anything, there was no emotion. There was no feeling there. It was all repression. So there was a ton of anger and frustration there, like big time.
How do you cross over to that feeling part with, man, many men, including myself, can relate to that, and women too. There are definitely women who have that, they're set up that way. Everyone can relate to this to some degree, of course.
Yeah.
But how do you bridge that gap or even tell somebody how to look? Because I remember not even knowing that emotional material was really there. Like it felt like I am doing emotion work, like in a sense, or the logical. I remember it so well, that logical, like trying to, with good intentions, trying to feel around what's actually happening here and trying to use sort of empathy, but a very intellectual empathy, to understand situations and people. But how did you bridge that gap to finally like really feeling?
Well, once I kind of, the thing I said earlier about victimization, once I kind of got tired of playing that game and just worn out, it's either like you're going to die or you're going to do something. You're going to surrender, you're going to die. Something's got to change. You got to do something. So for me, honestly, and I don't recommend it. It was really like just attrition, just looking at my thoughts and seeing how they affected me. And really I started looking at everyone else first. That was kind of how I started to do it. I said, okay, I'm going to watch everyone that I know, and I'm going to see how their beliefs operate and their mental associate, what they do, what they say, how that affects their life. And then this was like a long drawn out process for me in that way. But to answer your question directly, I would say meditation, because when I was younger in my early 20s, I was on some, like Wellbutrin and Zoloft. I tried some of those, didn't do anything. Made me feel kind of just cold or just kind of standoffish, which I sort of was already. So that didn't help. And I didn't like that. And I didn't like the way I fit. And I read that it could affect you and long-term use could affect you in certain ways physically. And I didn't want that. And I didn't know. And also there was like this, I'm not surrendering to this. I'm going to beat it. And I'm not taking medication. It was kind of like that. But meditation, I started meditating in about 2015 or 16, with the first guy, the mentor guy. He talked to me about it. He got me to read a couple books, and I tried it before, but not, just very sporadically. So I know that a lot of people can wake up and can do things without meditation, but for me, as a logic-minded person who's very logical, it was like I needed that. So I started doing that, and he had me for the first year of meditation. I did nothing but concentration meditation. I did nothing else. He had me trying to get to jhanas. And what the jhanas did is, I finally reached or had a first jhana on a self meditation retreat I did to myself. I went away for 4 days in the mountains and just did meditations geared towards that. And when I learned how to get that or reach that, it's not described as something that you would use it for. But for me, when I got to first jhana, it was like the tingling sensation, and it was like very like hype, energy, joy. And then the second jhana was more relaxed joy, you might say. And I would get in that as often as I possibly could, and it would rub off on my day where the depression would not be able to take me over as much. It was kind of like a feeling that would stay with me.
Hmm.
But also with meditation, after I did that, then I did some Vipassana and ran Daniel Inger's book, and got into it that way. I started doing different types. I did a little bit of meta, but mostly that. And then a lot of because I had Jeb McKenna, I did a lot of autolysis work, writing, tons of writing about my beliefs. It's just tons. If I think back now about all the work it was like a ton of work. And I still had that mindset of trying to figure it out, trying to wrestle it down. And yeah, so all of that really helped. But what it is the inquiry for me. Self inquiry is where it really kicked in. It's like until you get some space between your thoughts. I mean, I don't know, like a heart-based person, women can surrender pretty easy, and that's awesome. But for me, I couldn't do it. So for me, getting in between thoughts like that with inquiry and meditation, concentration, really created, like literally, it felt to me like time started to slow down, and it created a space where I could then watch these thoughts and these beliefs and mechanisms happening. And at first it was oscillation. I would have reactions. I'd get really angry or whatever would happen. And then an hour later I'd go, God, why did I do that? And then of course you're berating yourself with thoughts. So what happened is it started oscillating. And the more I did concentration and inquiry, the oscillation got closer and closer. And until then, when things were happening, I was seeing the thoughts as they were happening. Mm-hmm. And that was really helpful to start, clear seeing is everything, mm-hmm. It's like, which is another thing I saw on this last retreat, but it's like, you don't have to do anything. You don't have to figure anything out. You just have to see it as clearly as you possibly can. And when you see it's harming you, it breaks apart, drops off.
Beautifully stated.
That's how I began to start breaking down.
Yeah, I can feel directly into what you're saying. And like, even, I don't even know what words you're using, but it's so obvious how you're pointing. For someone who's more logical, like, can you give us a little bit about what worked for you for inquiry? Did you use a question? How did you lead yourself to that point of observation that's not disassociated? I guess that's the first question I had.
I would say who and why led me nowhere except back into the mind. What and where led me to this? If I ask the why questions, why is like, you're never getting, why is the mind going to go, oh, let's figure that out. And you're going to go right back in the circles, thought reflections, who, I know who is a real popular one. And I did try it for a while, but it just didn't do anything for me. It was just kind of who, and then the mind would start going crazy. And, what is this? Where am I? These kind of things I started exploring. I probably started exploring, the senses a whole lot. And, the ATR group, working with you, the ATR group was very, very helpful. Several people in there, especially Yin. And so they were very helpful. And all of John's writing, of course, I was just poring over that all the time. That's the last, 3 years. That's basically when that really kicked in. And just really figuring out like emotion work, I did a whole lot of emotion work with the first guy, but the emotion work really kicked into high gear where I really started, not saying no. How you got to discover when you say no, you got to discover it in the moment when you're saying no to experience, because it's so quick. It'll come right underneath you and just start operating you right off the bat if you're not really watching. But like I said, all the seeking, it's like the seeking is unnecessary. It's the clear seeing that you have to do.
Beautiful.
Seeking, I understand why people seek, because I did forever, but it's like the seeking in books. You read books and you figure out practices and ideas, and that helps you look at things and figure things out. And And then you put it down for a while and practice. And then maybe if you have a realization and you're going to look into emptiness later, then you pick up books again and read a little bit about it. So you get an idea what they're, but the clear seeing of your processes is what does it. And that's not seeking.
I completely
If you're
agree.
seeking, one of the main things a lady asked me one time in I think it was your group about it. And I would say, if you're seeking and you've been seeking really for anyone, but if you've been seeking, especially for a long time, there's either a repressed emotion, there's a belief there about enlightenment or seeking that you're not seeing. So I would suggest if you're doing that, do a bunch of writing on seeking to uncover, or inquiry, whatever. I did writing, it really helped. Why am I seeking? What am I getting out of it? What am I missing? What beliefs here might be here that's keeping this seeking going? Because that seeking was the frustration. And after the depression was lifted slightly, it was all frustration. And that's when I met you. And that was the frustration,
I have a
what you
couple
said.
questions, or one is just a reflection on what you said about the uselessness, not uselessness, the dissatisfaction of trying to ask a who am I kinds of questions.
Yeah.
I find that's pretty common after an initial awakening, after an awakening or a significant shift in identity. I find it can be, it's just like meaningless after that, often, for a lot of people, not for everyone, but for a lot of people, it becomes quite meaningless because you see that it's really a concept. It's like, where do you want me to look for concepts? Again, though, where, right? Where is very, it can be really powerful, even just the question where, but anything that leads you into your immediate experience, or as you said, to clear seeing, I 100% agree. That's where the money is. However you can find that, however you can lead yourself to it. And then you said something was great.
That's why I was sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to reflect. You said something that was so good. It's when seeking starts instead of clear seeing, it happens fast, and it does happen fast actually, but you can catch it. And maybe you can just differentiate for someone, like even in real time right now, who doesn't actually know the difference, because some people really don't know the difference between seeking and clear seeing of what's occurring here. What is it? What's the giveaway? For me, I might say something like a distraction would be the giveaway. When you're starting to look at your process or your experience right now, and all of a sudden, you just suddenly want to go do something that's your go-to distraction, that's probably something avoiding or seeking that's starting to happen rather than clear seeing. That's just an example I might give. But what would you tell somebody who actually doesn't know the difference between seeking and just clear seeing, which, as you said, rightly so, is not actually seeking?
Well, you use the clear seeing to see the seeking, because, like, if you're reading a book, there's a piece in your mind, if you can back up and see it, that's going, there's an answer here. And then when I get that answer in this book, everything's going to fall apart. I'm going to be free. That's the narrative talking. Oh, one really big thing that I think helped me personally is, I know I've said narrative a few times. What I started doing is I started calling all the mind stuff the narrative, to depersonalize it a little bit, to put a space there. And if something would come up, I would say, the narrative saying this. So it was kind of like, because I already felt like a possession, like I said. So I started naming it like this would give me distance from the thoughts, so they didn't feel like my thoughts. And then I would call it that. And then it was just like I was almost I did it with motions too. I would put these things in quadrants, not to push them away, but just give me some space to look at them and to see them. So I started depersonalizing all this stuff a little bit, to get under it. That was a really, really big help for me.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that it can be helpful sometimes, that simple labeling, but just to notice, you don't have to go beyond the labeling step. You can just say, oh, okay, there's an emotion being felt here. Maybe it's not my emotion necessarily. It's not, or there's a thought here. There's a narrative. It's not my narrative. I'm not doing the thinking necessarily. That gap is really important. And with a shift in identity, that gap is accessible, but you got to, even then, you still have to slow down. You may have to slow down through a lot of meditation or through really being precise with paying attention to what's actually happening right now in your process. You can open that gap for sure. And then there's space. I'm a little careful to say space because I don't want people to reify that. And that can be your
Right. Yeah.
seeking. You can seek space. You can, or even imagine overlay the idea of space or awareness onto your experience. But that's not what we're talking about. It's getting
True.
under that primary sense of I'm the one that's the thinker. I'm the one that's even the aware one. You can get under that.
The only thing I mean by space is kind of like I noticed when the oscillation would happen, and then the thoughts started becoming more present where I could see them as they were happening. It kind of felt like time would slow down just enough, is what it felt like to me. There would be a little space there, and time would slow down, and then you could see your processes a lot more clearly. And I think I did a lot of. I would meditate every day, still hour to 2 hours, depending. So I would spend the first half of that, doing shamatha, concentration, just to get the mind concentrated. And then I would sometimes enter jhana, sometimes I wouldn't. I didn't care at that point. You don't need it. You don't need that. You can just get the good concentration and slow things down a little bit. And then I would go into inquiry the rest of the time in meditation. And sometimes I would just do nothing meditation. I did different things. That concentration, it just helped me slow down and see the processes more clearly as they were happening.
Yeah.
And that's all I mean by space. I don't mean like literal space or like, yeah.
Yep, I totally get it. Just wanted to make that distinction for anyone who fixates in that as a belief. And it can happen, but that's not what you're talking about, and it's obvious. When you mentioned shamatha, so say somebody wants to, what's your go-to for that? Like a resource? Do you have a good resource that's simple for somebody to use that as a concentrative process, a meditative process?
The first book I ever read on it was called The Mind Illuminated. And that has a very logical breakdown. For me, I was like, I like this. It's logical breakdown of stages of meditation. And it goes, I think there's like 10. I haven't read it in several years now, but there's like 10, and there's a whole lot of helpful stuff about. It doesn't have a lot of jargon, and it's a lot of helpful stuff. If somebody wants a pragmatic book on meditation, it's really good. I mean, they do go some of that. If somebody's interested in jhanas, then I would say Lee Brasington has a book called Right Concentration. That's really good. And that's all about that. It's all about jhanas.
Awesome.
Those are the two main books. And then, of course, I read Daniel Ingram's book, Hardcore Teaching of the Buddha. Has a lot of stuff about meditation and all kinds of stuff. Great stuff in there. I was everywhere, all over the place. I was on his Dharma Overground board. I was in ATR group. I was in your group. I was, listening to YouTube video, a lot of seeking, YouTube videos like crazy, podcasts, anything and everything, which I don't necessarily recommend that for people. That's just how it, that's how it went for me.
Sometimes it's like what you got to do.
Yeah, it's just seeking to you get to bang your head against the wall, burn yourself out, or whatever. And
the one thing I want to say about you is that there are people who do that, but they do it in a little bit too much of a disengaged way. Like, yeah, you can get on these forums and read about it and talk about it and on and on and on. But you got to apply it. Like you try it. You do something. Like that's been obvious to me. Whether it's emotion work, shadow work, you put it into practice. And that's key. Like it's okay if you're kind of, some people have to do this for a while. You're kind of all over the board, trying this, trying that, trying therapy, trying inquiry, trying writing it out, trying emotion, trying meditation. But you got to like apply it, like really get, and if there's one area you're kind of avoiding, maybe look in that area. So for instance, one example would be retreat. Now you can do cheap retreats. You can do them on your own at home, or you can do online retreats, but some people really avoid it actually. And it's like, man, there's probably a reason for that because retreat space puts you in a completely different set of circumstances that you're just not used to being in, and put your mind in a different space, put your heart in a different space, your behaviors, they don't have the usual surrogates to kind of perpetuate themselves, and it can really break things open. But like you applied yourself in all these different ways. And that's, in my opinion, what matters ultimately. Sometimes you're lucky and you find exactly the right interaction with the right teacher or person or process for you, or sometimes you can just surrender, but not everyone can. And then you do have to look around and you have to try things, but apply them, you know what I mean? And really give your heart to it. And that's one thing. And it's the warrior spirit in a way, like you've given your heart to this, obviously. And every time I've interacted with you, it's been obvious. You've tried hard, and worked at it, and it paid off,
That first awakening, like it literally took over my whole life for good or bad or both or whatever way you want to look at it. I don't even look at it that way now, but yeah, that's all I wanted. I didn't care about anything else. And
Mm.
there's like a line in Jed McKenna's book, and he says, "Figure out what's true, and then you can do whatever you want." And it's like I took that personally, and actually that actually became a fixation. That wasn't good, but yeah,
Yeah.
I did. It became a fixation.
Yeah.
But like you
Yeah.
talking about not wanting to go on retreat, the first thing I ever did is I went on a self retreat, and I asked the guy, I was like, "What should I do for the first treat?" He goes, "Don't do anything." He said, "Just sit there in quiet and don't move or don't meditate. Just sit there." And what he was telling me was, you don't have to go any. I mean, if you get the kids out of the house or your wife out of the house for the day, and you just sit there, and you don't have don't have to have a practice. Just sit there and just sit there and let your mind be bored and watch how crazy it goes.
Yep.
It can go crazy when it starts to get bored. In our normal lives, we have distractions. You pick up the phone, you do whatever, you go outside, you go work out. If you're in a place like in a mountain cabin and you got nowhere to go and you're just sitting there and you get bored, but you don't do anything with that boredom and you just sit there, watch how crazy the mind goes.
I 100% agree with that. 100%.
Yeah.
There's a great quote. I'm going to screw it up, but by Franz Kafka, who said, you don't even have to leave your room. Just sit at the table and wait. You don't even have to wait. Just become quiet, still the mind, or quiet through and through, and everything will unmask itself. The universe will unmask itself to you. It will roll in ecstasy at your feet. And that's true, but there's an intermediate part where it becomes very uncomfortable. And, that's kind of the contemporary Soto way. It's shikantaza. Just sit and don't do anything. Everything you need to see will be seen. Everything you need to feel will be felt. And it will surprise you how much is there. Do a Zen sesshin where you don't have much support. You're just sitting, doing nothing but sitting. Might be real peaceful about it for about an hour, 2 hours, if you're used to meditating. After that, it's not so peaceful. It starts to change a lot. And
that's where the boredom sets in.
yeah, boredom. And then almost like a terror of like, I can't move. I can't distract myself. The other thing it made me think of is when you talked about distraction isn't as passive a thing as we think it is. It's rather active. We're actively looking for distraction to keep our identity structure fed. It's like, it's the hungry, ego. It's like, reading and talking with people. And it's just constantly remind me who I am. Remind me who I am. Let's keep this thing going. It's actually what's happening. And when you just stop that long enough, you'll know, like it'll start to rear its head and you'll feel its power. Actually, you'll feel the power of the ego structure. And yeah, so do we fast forward to the most recent retreat, or do you want to mention anything else before kind of going into that?
The only thing before we go to that is, I was working with you the last 2 or 3 years, and then you got progressive. I think when I first subscribed to your YouTube channel, you had like 900 people, and now that you got like 24. So in the past couple of years, it's like, whoa. So, I knew you couldn't do, talks like this with each other. Like I knew you weren't doing Zooms, So I started talking to Josh the last 5 months before the retreat, really working on some stuff. And he really got me. I've already done the emotion work as far as feeling and not turning away, not saying no. He got me more into the way, Josh talks a certain way that's really cool and different. And so he really gets under things fast. And he was talking to me about, just getting out of the head as a habit and getting more into the body, or getting more into, it's not even like feeling the body's emotions or sensations. It's just feeling sensations in general in the scene kind of. And, I talked to him for like 5 months. So if anybody wants to talk to you, and like you're too busy, it's like talk to Josh. And I mean, I know Eshwar is really great, and so is Violet, but I haven't talked to them in a Zoom. So Josh is really good if people are looking for someone to guide them in this way. And he's very direct, but he's also compassionate and funny and all that kind of stuff. So he helped
I
me a
agree.
whole lot right into the retreat. And the funny thing is, I know we're going to talk about the retreat now. The funny thing is after the retreat and then looking back at this stuff, all this stuff happened in a line. Even like my first mentor, then you, and then Josh. It's like the steps of what I needed to see or look at was like all in this line that I can see now in hindsight. Of course, when you're in the moment flying blind, you're like, what's going on? What's going to happen? But it's like afterwards, and you look back, you're like, oh yeah, that had to happen right then.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
It's like
yeah,
clockwork. My Zen teacher used to say
yeah,
this. He's like, when you're in the, going through this, it feels like I don't know how he said this, but it feels like a shit show. Like it does not feel linear, doesn't feel divine, it doesn't feel spiritual. It feels like you're coming apart at the seams. It feels like endless
yeah.
frustration, endless doubt, endless thoughts. But it would at some point you're like, that was clockwork. I felt and saw everything I needed to feel and see in the time frame I could actually handle it, really. Because sometimes you just can't handle it. Like you
It's
just
just your
aren't
narrative
ready.
telling you that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just your narrative telling you you should be further, you should be different, things should
Yeah.
be different. And that's what you got to see, clear seeing. That's what clear seeing's for,
Yeah.
is to see
Absolutely.
that. Of course, I know better than anybody when somebody hears this and be like, yeah, but that's in the moment, that's so hard to do. And I completely get it. Completely
Yeah.
get it.
Yeah. The other day I thought about
Yeah.
making it. I've made videos about this and I've talked about it, but I thought about actually saying this directly. Like people are like, what's the fastest way? What's the most direct path and all this? Honestly, is exactly what you said. If you can actually find the sensation of just being, find this, not the thought of being, not consciousness, but the sensation, and you may find it through the body sense or whatever, but stay in that sensation. Like really just stay in it. It'll feel fluid, it'll feel raw, it'll feel unbound, it'll feel vulnerable as hell sometimes, but you can actually stay there. Like you can keep attention with that, and realize you'll realize over time that's what you've been abandoning. That's what self abandonment is. That's what avoidance is. That's what disassociation is. You can actually stay with that, and let the mind do what it needs to do. It'll get your attention here and there, but really stay there. That's about as direct as it gets, And at some point, everyone will do that. You once you've unloaded enough of the polarities up here and the aversions and the drama and the attachment to narratives and the fixations, you'll go right to the sensation. Because where else is there? It becomes obvious at some point. So
One
yeah.
thing Josh did that really helped me with logically was every time you have a thought, check in with your body as much
Mm,
as you can. Of course, you're going to have thousands of thoughts a day you don't catch, but every time you have a thought, especially a me thought or I thought, check back in downstairs and not necessarily like find it in your body. Just feel the general sensations. Just feel general sensations. You don't necessarily have to pinpoint it every time and really dissect it. Just take yourself out of your head and put it down here in any
mm,
sensation you feel and just stay with that as long as you possibly can. And then when you have another thought, you have the thought, you might look at the thought, you're doing inquiry, but then check right back in. And that really helped me break that habit of the head,
perfect.
going into the distraction and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, after retreat, this is just for the audience. After retreat, Tony sent me a message saying, I had a small shift and then I had a big shift, and I knowing coming from you, I was like, okay, this is going to be good. I already know this. I'm very excited because you're not the kind of guy who some people talk about it all the time. Oh, I had this happen and this shift and this experience and endlessly talking about experiences. You don't do that at all. You don't talk about experiences because you know the difference. And so I was like, oh yeah. And I listened to just a series of voice recordings from you. And I was like, man, this, it was like 15 minutes of voice recordings total or something if I added them up. And I'm like, this is a masterclass right here in non-dual realization, like deep realization. It's so good. I still want to go back and like have those like maybe transcribed or something. They're just so good. Anyway, let's talk about that. What happened at this most recent retreat at the Art of Living?
Oh, okay. So this was the second retreat. I did the one last year too. Nothing happened last year. Just good deep meditation. But this year, I it was like on Wednesday, so we got there Sunday. So it was like 4 days in. So it was a lot of concentration, lot of really group concentration. You know, that feeling like you talk about that builds throughout the retreat. It's really helpful. People should definitely do that if they're thinking about it. Um, so the first on Wednesday evening, I was meditating and I was meditating on the senses, and I was switching between one sense and another sense. And I've heard you say and others say all the time that there's a conceptual overlay over sensations. And I was thinking about that, and I was meditating. So I was staying in those senses and switching to the senses, and then I stayed with the sound for a while. And there was these ladies that were cleaning the bathrooms, and they were flushing the commodes over and over again. I don't think they were supposed to be there at that time, but they were anyway. But I didn't mind. I was just using it for. Your sound is off. I'm not
Oh,
sure.
sorry. I was
I
going to
don't hear
say,
what you're
I was joking. I said I paid them to do that at just the right time.
paid them to do that. Well, that was very helpful. But I was sitting there, and I was pretty deep concentrated, and I was hearing the sound of the toilet flushing, and you know, sounds in the room too, and all this stuff. And I just had this moment, and I was like, I was kind of doing inquiry too, and I had this moment. Like, I always just kind of thought of conceptual overlay as like a blanket over reality, like labels, and it wasn't deep enough what I was thinking, but I was talking about having the space and the clear seeing in the space is there was just enough space there that I saw the sound happening, and then I saw a thought. This is very quick. This is not like a long drawn out thing. This happened very fast. But I saw a thought create itself like a glove going right over the sound. Right after the sound made the sound, a thought was created that was the pretty much, I would say, an exact replica of the sound of the toilet. And it was a thought, and I had a boom, like a realization right then. I'm hearing the thought of a sound, not the sound. Or maybe I'm hearing a tiny piece of the sound at the beginning, but what I'm really concentrated on is the thought of the sound in that moment. And then it happened again with a different sound, and I noticed it, and it happened again, and then all of a sudden it dropped. I was kind of like, I think I asked myself a question like, I don't have to do, why am I have to do that? And when I said that, it was something like that. And when I did that, it just dropped. And the next time the lady flushed the toilet, it was like the coolest sound I've ever heard in my life. And I was like, whoa. And then it happened again, and I heard them talking in there. And I think they were speaking Spanish or something. I didn't understand what they were saying, but it was just sounds. And it was just like every sound then totally replaced the me behind the eyes, and the sound was like right here. But then it was also like right here, right here, right here, right here. Right. It was like unlocatable, and it replaced every sound was this as the sound. Every awareness of this was the sound at the same time arising together, and it replaced me like behind the eyes. It was just like taking place right there.
When you said this, I related it exactly and precisely to the 7 stages. I think at one point, uh, Tan said there was just the bell. The bell was just dong, and he said there was no I am. The dong was the I am. I had mistaken I am, or mistaken that for I am. And it's just
Yeah.
that pure sound. The pure sound, and there's no distance, no one hearing the sound, just that. And it's so beautiful. The first time you hear it, uh, like you can't unhear that. You can't unknow that. And you
Yeah.
can't ever go back and forget in a way that the reflection of it, and it's not just one, in a sense, it's not just one reflection, it's two reflections. The reflected sound and the reflected one that hears it, they kind of co-arise,
Yeah.
and they're both in consciousness in a way. They're not really the sound, but the sound is there, or what that is actually there. Whew. Yeah.
Like the awareness is the sound.
Yeah.
And it was just like it was like I'd never heard a toilet flush before or something. And I was
Mhm.
like practically begging her on the inside to do it again and again.
Mm.
I was like, oh, I want to hear that again. Uh, and then ever since then, uh, but even, well, they were both simultaneously very cool, but even just as cool is seeing that thought replicate that sound right after the sound starts. And it just slides right over it like a glove. I made a funny meme about it. I was going to send to you after we're done, but it was just like, I mean, just seeing that, and that's what I talk about, having that concentration and just, I mean, you don't need much. It's like just enough space to see clearly the mechanism doing it, and when that you see it, it's like a magician with a rabbit doing a trick, and the rabbit disappears. And you're like, where'd it go? But it's like you see the box underneath the table that the rabbit goes to, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. And then the trick is just like it doesn't trick you anymore. It's just so obvious. And ever since then, every sound has been very like just non-dual, really non-dual. Uh,
Beautiful.
it's been about 3 weeks, so I've kind of gotten a little used to it, but it's still striking sometimes visually too, and and then I switched it to like sensations, and then it was like seeing with the seeing part of it is harder, but it's a little more tricky.
Yeah.
But I would say before I would be contracted all the time, and I'd have non-dual experiences in the scene, like seeing and hearing, and then after that, it's like non-dual with some contraction. That's
Yeah.
still contraction still happens. Is
Yeah. It
how
like
I
turns
would
itself on
describe
its
that
head.
part.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then sometimes it's like super striking non-dual, and then it kind of comes in a. I'm not worried about it now. I used to ask you about it. I used to be real worried about it. No, I don't care. It's just like it'll happen. It's just more relaxed.
Mhm.
Um, yeah,
Beautiful.
so, very cool.
And was that the first half of what you described to me? And then
Yeah,
was it
that's
the
the
next?
first half. That was
Yeah.
the small. That was the small. When that happened, I had this energy come up in my chest, and this was nighttime. And then I had the energy, and then Violet did her sound meditation. And then after that, meditated some more, and went back to the room and just had that energy in my chest, and just the sounds walking back to my room, like just hearing the trees and the wind and all that, and it was just like it's just amazing. And just relaxing, or just an ease. There was just an ease there. Uh, and I went back to my room, and then I woke up at like 3 o'clock in the morning, and I had to pee, and then that energy in my chest was still there. I had no idea what it was. I didn't even care because I was so like kind of relaxed about it at that point. So then the next morning, I ate breakfast, and then I went to the first your guided meditation. I didn't even hear what you said in the meditation. I was just like, I was really concentrated, and it was really built up. So I didn't even hear what you said. I was just meditating. It was like dropped right into like unbound consciousness, and just like. And then we had one more meditation, and then you did your talk. So during those first two meditations is where the next thing happened. Yeah, which is really hard to talk. Really hard to figure out how to talk about, but I will try. So I was deep in the concentration of the about an hour in, and I just had these. I don't even remember. I don't think I was doing like a do nothing meditation. I was just listening to the sounds, and like I heard Paul Hederman once describe it as like downloads, and that's what it felt like to me. It felt like these downloads. It felt like this was using the imagination to show something, but I wasn't thinking and imagining. Like I wasn't trying to imagine something. It's the best way I could say it. But I had like this 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 vision kind of come up of like a warrior. It's like a samurai warrior, and it had a sword, and there was a projection. My wife asked me like, "What do you mean?" And I was like, "It's kind of like when R2D2 does the projection of Princess Leia in Star Wars, and it kind of was kind of like that." And and there was a sword, and then it was a projection of the warrior, another projection, and it looked like apparition or ghost, and it was a dropping of the sword, and then the sword reflection dropped, and it went away, and it did that again, but the second time it came up, it was apparition of me, of like Tony and narratives and emotions and and then the sword just dropped from, it felt like the mirror from this side of it projecting the apparition, and the sword was here and it dropped. And when it dropped, the reflection sword dropped. It just dropped and went away. And then it happened like one or two more times. And then like on the third or fourth time, when the sword dropped and the apparition went away, is like, it was like a frozen, it was like identification was cut, but it didn't feel, I didn't see like it was a felt thing. And it was just bloop. And it was like very subtle, but it was very like, I was like, oh, it was like that kind of thing. It was like, oh, and then right after that happened, it was like a flood of like this, just all kinds of stuff just came in. It was like a dam burst or scaffolding collapsed or whatever you want to say. I don't know, but it was like a realization right then, like all the suffering of the narrative of Tony, Tony's an apparition, and all the suffering that's ever happened right now, and it's all one thought. Or you could say maybe not one exact thought, but it's like one bundle of thoughts or belief in the moment that you're believing, which is the identification. And it was just known. It was like Tony's an apparition, and if he goes about his life and he's doing things, and from the side view or from a different angle, Tony looks like he's there because there's thoughts and there's like, you're interacting with people and things are happening. But if you look directly, it's like the apparition just disappears. And it was like so obvious, and it was so powerful, but so subtle. And it was just like I said, it wasn't like, oh, like fireworks. It was just like, oh. And it was just so obvious that like, you're the unborn and the apparition is appears, and it isn't, so there was like, I had a few like things of, I remember one thought I had was like, oh, I have a test tomorrow, I'm going to fail, just a example. And it was like, yeah, there's no future, because that suffering is you're having right now is right now. Mm-hmm. And it's ruining whatever's going on right now. So of course, when that happens, it flung me back to the past. And it was like time right then just collapsed. It was just like, boom, like it like imploded. Mm-hmm. And it became so clear that whole path that me and you just discussed for the last hour was apparition. It was completely empty. And all that suffering was one thought I was having in the moment. No matter how many moments you go back to in the past, memories, all that suffering was the moment you were having it is the only suffering there ever was. Mm-hmm. And so then what happened was, and it still felt like this wasn't me like what you might do an inquiry. It feels like a showing. It was like, see this is what it kind of felt like. So it took me back to all these memories that I had related to my dad, to just anything, good and bad, anything. And it was like saying, see. And what was so weird is like the emotions were coming up from those memories right then. Mm. But at the same time, I could feel them directly. It's like doing like rapid emotion work where I didn't have to, emotion work, you search the thoughts, you try to get the feeling, this was like, see this. And it was like, I felt that emotion, and then it was shown to be completely empty right at the same time. It was like, see, this is empty. This never happened, mm-hmm. And then I always was confused when people would say nothing's ever happened. But what it is nothing concrete has ever happened. It's all like in a narrative, and it's all, and it just took me back to different. It just showed different ones all the way back as far as I could go, and it was like all the frustration and doubt evaporated because it's like a narrative. It's an apparition. Every thought and belief is an apparition. And
Mm,
an apparition just kept coming up. I don't know why that word came up, but it did. And I was like, that's a cool word. But it was like, that's what it was shown like. So that's what I've been kind of saying when I explained it. But
mm,
it was just like all of that, and in that moment, there was like this, it's like my fist, it felt like this just went like it just opened.
mm,
That's what it felt like internally. It's just like a release. Um, and I saw all this stuff about my father and just all these things that he did, and my mom didn't handle it right, and all this. And it was just like, it was narratives. It was like all these narratives doing the best that they could with what they had.
mm.
And they became very innocent narratives. It was just like, they just all were seen like their own apparitions and narratives. It's like those causes and conditions that created their lives were empty and blameless. And, they did the best they could. And the best part of it was immediately seen that Tony did the best he could, you know, just like, you know, he was so innocent. And it was like he was seen as like an apparition, but also just kind of like I don't know what the right word is, like a subset of reality, like part of reality, just not the
Yeah.
main deal. Uh,
Yeah.
but he was so innocent, and there was just sort of like this pride that he made it through that he did the best he could, not just with like the violent stuff or any of that, but just like, because like throughout my 20s, it's like I just wanted to die every day because it was horrible, and it was just like reality just scraping up against itself all the time, trying to figure it out, and I was thinking it was something, and all it ever was my narrative. All it ever was that one suffering thought I was having at each moment of whenever time the suffering came up.
Mm.
uh
Man, you said
yeah,
so much. You said so much there.
I feel like I had to like get through it really fast because I was like, this is so crazy, I gotta like
No, I
say.
mean it's you're transmitting it so powerfully, and I can
Yeah,
talk about it mechanistically and say the first shift was like the illusion of time or the illusion of space collapsed, and the second shift, the illusion of time collapsed completely, and without time and space, there's no fundamental illusion anymore. Really, there's nowhere for an apparent self to hide, and it's seen to be this beautiful apparition, as you describe, or appearance. But
yeah,
it's all here. Everything will appear here, no matter how it feels like it's appearing in time or space. But you said it so much better than that because it was, in a sense, personal, but obviously it's also radically impersonal. And
yeah,
that's the innocence. And you also tied in so beautifully this question I get a lot of like, if I talk about emptiness or shunyata or the unborn or the unbound, people will say, "What about love? Where's love?" And it's like that's exactly where love is. That and you tied it together perfectly because it's seeing things as they are. And when you see, not that there are things or that things are any certain way, but when you see clearly, very clearly, without any apparition or any fundamental illusion, fundamental to consciousness, then you see absolute innocence and simplicity in everything.
yeah,
And that you can't do anything but love that. It's so precious in a sense, right?
yeah, yeah. It was so that innocence was really dramatic to see. And I understand what you say sometimes too, where people can have grief about losing the identity, because when I went back and saw, this is 10 or 15 years of hardcore depression, of like wanting to die, and seeing instantly right then that it was completely empty and it never actually happened. And I don't want people to think that I'm dismissing pain or anything like that. And the reason why I feel like I can say it is because I went through it for 2 decades, and I was on so many times that I felt so serious and deadly and wanting to die, and just like, I can't take any more of this. But seeing it then, uh, that all of that depression, no matter what has happened to you, is all in this bundle of thoughts you're believing in this timeless moment.
And in that timeless moment, and in that zero distance, or that non-dual knowing and clear seeing, you have infinite capacity for it.
Mm-hmm.
Because to put it in time, we're actually running from it. We're running from something and that's impossible. You can't actually run from it, but that's why it feels so freaking uncomfortable, because we're trying to do the impossible in a way. We're trying to separate something that's not separatable. So what you find when you go here in the way you're speaking, and not through disassociation, but through collapse of illusion, then the access is infinite, and the capacity is astounding, actually, for experience. The capacity for experience, and that is compassion, and it's unfettered compassion. It's impersonal compassion that can also apply to any personal experience for anything or anyone you come into contact with.
What was so important that I saw too was, it's like you see the depression is empty, and all of that stuff is empty, and you see that all the power there ever was is in the unborn, and then it's like, that's what you really are. And the apparition, the identification is believing you're the apparition, which is made up of the thoughts and the beliefs and the emotions that you've labeled, that are really just energies or sensations flying around you've labeled, and you've given it that power. But the power is always like right here to drop that sword. With the clear seeing is the sword that drops the apparition, and it makes the power come back to the unborn. The power never left, but you believe it has. So it's like, but the thing is like, when the power, when you realize that that's what you are and that's the power, but you realize the apparition is not real, there's no control. So you can bring the power back, but you can't claim it as an apparition, or you're getting diluted again. And I think this was a speculation I was thinking, but I think that's what happens sometimes when someone has a first awakening and then it goes off the rails, is they feel that power. Some of them are just con men, but that, if they have a awakening, they feel that power and they think, it's my power.
Yep.
I did this. I'm this. And an ego, like the apparition, tries to grab on and claim it.
Yep.
And the way I saw it, I don't know how they could do that. I don't know how. It's so beyond me, the apparition, that it's like, I don't know. And it's like, there were so many insights that came up that disappeared forever. I'll never even remember, but another one was like the narratives that come together that create your life, your supposed life. And it's like these causes and conditions that created these conditionings that you have were created by other narratives from your parents. And to change your life, if you're depressed or if you're seeking or any of that, all the power is right here. And the power is not something you do. It's not something you claim. The only power is clear, is like the sword of clear. So let's call it, it's like the sword of clear seeing. And when you use it, you don't have to do anything. You don't have to make anything happen. You just see it as clearly as you can. And when you see those narratives are not working and all the power's here, they change all by themselves. And then they reflect outward. They may touch other narratives. They may not. A big thing I always had was, God, am I supposed to love everybody like we're all one and all this stuff? And it's kind of like, you see the nothing that they are, but the narratives you don't have to love, and maybe get the fuck away from them. You know what I'm saying? Maybe they're not serving, they're not good for yours, and then they get replaced. And you kind of, but you see how, like, some things come together. I was thinking about my mom. I was like, if you have a belief that you deserve to be abused, it's like an innocent belief that you've picked up somehow. And then that narrative of an abuser may come into your life and do it. And then uh, at some point, like if you get away from them and you get counseling or you get help, and then like a year later you go, how did I ever believe I deserve to be hurt? But it's just kind of the way I'm framing it. It's just like that narrative has changed. You've replaced with clear seeing a narrative about your apparition. And it's like you don't even need awakening for that. I mean, you can just bring things back to right now and just kind of say, when you see these things come up, like a suffering, look for that suffering that's, you know, they did this to me. They did this. Why did they divorce me 5 years ago? And I don't understand. It's like, that's a thought right now, right now. And you can go, hours here. I see that clearly, and then drop it and then move on. And then it'll come back up, of course, but you keep doing that. And that clear seeing, to me, for me, I don't speak for nobody else, but for me, that was the key to dropping the whole thing, or to seeing through the whole thing.
Beautiful.
For me, it was a lot of work and a lot of attrition and a lot of releasing at the end. So,
Man,
yeah.
so good.
I don't even know if I'm saying everything right. Does that
Dude,
sound correct to you?
very powerful. No, the transmission is very clear, very powerful.
Okay.
And I agree all the way up and down the line. It reminds me of a couple things. One is in, I think, the Thomas Gospel, Christ said somewhere, people think I came to spread peace upon the earth. I did not come to spread peace upon the earth. I came with a sword. It's a radical statement from someone who's known for compassion and mercy and all of it. But he's talking about the deeper teaching, the one that's even beyond relative compassion that he demonstrated, right? And in Dzogchen, it all, well, people who are Dzogchen practitioners and stuff would maybe disagree with the way I say it, but it all kind of comes back to empty clarity. And I agree with that. It is this sort of empty clarity. It's as you mentioned, the unborn, like it takes care of everything. And it also drives all of this. It drives the relative aspects of ourself to self-inquire in the right way and autologize, or however you say it, to deconstruct itself by effort, sometimes by frustration, by suffering, to the point where it's seen through as a fundamental illusion. And then, as Bonke said, everything is perfectly managed in the unborn. And so we can trust it and orient to it and know that you can't know how this is going to go for you. Tony couldn't know. Angelo couldn't know. It's going to go how it goes. But you do have access right now, period. That's it. And acknowledge it. Welcome it. Yeah.
And even if, like, as you're seeking, if you feel like really led to this, as you're seeking, whether you've had the first shift or not, it's like the clear seeing these patterns and these beliefs and these narratives can bring you like an infinitely better life as you go on. And I would just say you don't need the seeking aspect of it, because the seeking is the reaching to try to control it, to try to control the realization.
Yep.
So you just have to really dive into that seeking and write it out and find those beliefs out and what's causing that. And then just, like with the inquiry, for me, inquiry worked the best. I was doing it, all the time. I was really, every behavior, it's exhausting. It really is. It can be exhausting, but if you're called to this, you don't have any choice. You're doing it. And that's just the way it is, because the apparition doesn't have the power.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. And what you said is exactly what I see in people that wake up and keep waking up is the inquiry. Find out the way it works for you, but take it deeper and deeper into your experience now. Be curious, but be alert. Pay attention. Keep applying it, even when it's uncomfortable, and it will get uncomfortable. That's what works for this, in my experience.
One of your best things is see the thought as a thought. Oh, that's a thought. That's a thought.
Mm-hmm.
That's like, that's one of the best things you've said as far as putting this whole thing together of things that I've read. It's just like, just keep seeing it. Just keep seeing it. It'll get clearer and clearer, and it'll be foggy again, and you'll feel like you didn't do shit. You have never gone. You're not doing it right, and it'll feel. But what you'll realize is that's a thought that's saying that too.
That's
and you
right.
start uncovering, you start catching them, and you get better and clearer, and then the seeking isn't necessary. It's just, and then, like you said, I think there is value, tremendous value. It doesn't have to happen this way. I would guess not, but going on a retreat and putting yourself there for 7 days, I mean, that's the commitment. I mean, that's what you want, right? So that's what you do. And you set aside time to go deeper, because you can go deep in an hour, you can go deep in 2 hours, but man, building on 4 or 5 days of stuff, of most of the day, and just being around people that, and I'm not naturally like that. You know, a silent retreat was great for me because you don't have to talk to anybody. You just get
Hmm.
there, you just you don't even look at anybody. I'm like, this is it right here. I like this.
Yeah.
So for me, it was great. So,
Right on,
but
man.
yeah,
Well,
you know,
yeah,
show the
absolutely.
universe you're committed, and it'll drag you there. But it won't be. It may not always be easy, or it could be real easy. I don't know. I
Yeah.
can only speak for me in the trauma and the narratives and the conditionings on my end of what I had to do. Somebody else maybe don't have to. You know, it's like, though, that's the one thing to see too, is like, I don't want to say anything is going to be one way or another at all, because
Hmm.
it's like, to be completely proven wrong. Every rule is exception is not a rule. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's
Well, it's
like,
true. The,
yeah, I
the
can.
rule books and the maps and all that are really kind of apparitions themselves, or they're, you know, they can have an effect, but the effect can only really be to show you the value of looking here, again and again and again, and trusting the process. It won't, as you said, you can't know how it's going to go, for you. You just can't know, but you don't have to know how it's going to go. That's the beauty of, as you said, trusting the process or committing to the process and letting the universe drag you where it will. And sometimes it'll feel like it's showing you the most beautiful thing. Other times it'll feel like it's dragging you, kicking and screaming, but trust it.
Yeah. And an important thing to say, you said maps. It reminded me, a really important part of that realization was seeing back to that first uh, awakening, that it's been a fixation my whole life, and just seeing it never happen. It was completely empty too. It was an
Yeah.
arising appearance in the moment, and then it was held on to,
Yeah.
and all this frustration and stuff built. And then when I saw that was just empty, all the frustration and doubt about whether I had it or didn't have it or what it was meant, and all, it was like just gone. And
Yeah.
that's why that fist opened up and ease seeped in, and it was like,
Beautiful.
oh, like Paul Hederman's like, I'm not managing material. It's like, just like that. It's like, nope, I don't want to manage this shit no more. Here you
Yeah.
go.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what a nice surprise to be let off the hook, you know? Yeah.
Yeah.
All
Yeah.
right, my friend. Well, I
Yeah.
appreciate your time, man. This has been such a
Yeah.
incredible conversation, and I already know the people watching this are going to get a ton out of it. And yeah,
I
it was
hope it's helpful.
very clear coming through. And appreciate all the work you've done for yourself and the world and your family. And you know, even though it was really to end suffering, that's why we do this. That's why we engage this. We want to feel better. We want to break through and see through the illusions. But the work is very valuable, and I appreciate all the years you've done, and um, look forward to seeing how it sort of plays out now.
I would tell people that were just starting or been and haven't done it yet. You know, your YouTube channels is great as a support for the book. I would say, man, get the book and really delve deep into every bit of it, because, and then come back to the YouTube. It's great to watch the channel, and then that's great subset information, but the core of what they need, that will skip a bunch of stuff they don't need and dive deep into what they do. The pointing is like exactly great.
Well, I appreciate
Like
that.
I said, I wish
Yeah.
I had it back then. So I
Thanks,
would
man.
tell people to get that book and really study it, because there's a lot of stuff you say in the book that is, in other books and explained in ways that are very, like Buddhists. What you do is you take those concepts and you kind of talk about them in plain speaking, so people are getting those things, but they're not having to learn all these different layers. You're putting those layers in kind of sneaky. You kind of sneakily put them in an accessible way. So I know that's it. That's helpful.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I agree in the sense that the videos are great, but they're also impromptu and the speech is a little bit more loose and you know, they can transmit. But the book, I mean, I wrote, rewrote, revised. I got the language precise, so that not only it's not teaching you something, it's transmitting something. It's also transmitting to you your own ability to transmit to yourself and how to look in a precise way. That's hard to do in videos because you just speak in an impromptu way. So I think they transmit in different ways for sure. Just like a retreat is a completely different experience than any of this other stuff we're talking about. So all these different modalities that are available now, not just my stuff either. There's other Jed McKenna and Josh and different facilitators and Violet and Suzanne, and there's people you can interact with one-on-one where you're going to be interacting with somebody who does not recognize any filters either in you or them, and that has a profound effect as well. So utilize your resources. We live in a time now where this never happened in history. Like they didn't have the internet even 20 years ago, really, to get all this great content. And like we're lucky. And I think it's also why people are waking up a lot and faster. But it also makes it steep in a lot of ways too. So yeah.
And be careful, not that, just be careful who you decide to listen to as well.
Yeah, true.
There's a lot of people out there that say stuff that's can really turn you into a cul-de-sac that you don't get out of for a long time if you're not careful. So
I agree with that too. I always weigh in, and people message me sometimes, you should speak out about so and so, and I always weigh in how much I want to do that, because there are people who watch my stuff and they're really oriented toward a certain guru or someone that I kind of consider like lukewarm at best, But I'm not here to criticize that because I don't want to ostracize that person. I just trust that they're going to continue to attune to a deeper, I don't know, prompting to investigate in a very direct way and not worship a guru or put someone on a pedestal or, there's so much, there's confusing stuff out there, and some of it's not just confusing, but fraudulent. So I agree with you there, but there's so much variety now. Look around, you know what I mean? Read my chapter that it talks directly about how to watch out for certain teachers or certain dynamics in yourself that can orient you to a teacher that's unscrupulous, So
we have an inner compass too. You can kind of get a feel. You'll get a feel. You might get some warning bells like, this doesn't feel right or something. But then sometimes people may ignore that and say, well, they know better than me. It's like, maybe not.
Right. Exactly. Don't overlook red flags.
Yeah, don't overlook red flags.
All right, Tony. Thanks again, man. We'll have to talk again sometime, and I'm sure personally we'll obviously talk. But thanks for your time. Everyone's going to get so much out of this, and I'm just really happy for you.
All right. Thanks for having me.